And you're going to see when you're there, some of you have been there, you're going to see women, young people standing in the middle in front of a damn tank.
Вы получите ядерный удар по территории Европы в случае, если вы соберетесь там какой-нибудь миротворческий контингент НАТО создать, в случае, если вы соберетесь его куда-то там вводить и прочее, да, это будет ядерная война.
А это было и сказано французским журналистам. Это будет ядерная война, вы должны это понимать. Значит, храбрые поляки, от вашей Варшавы не останется за полсекунды.
If Russia is provoked by NATO, if Russia is attacked by NATO, I don't know. So we are nuclear power. Why not? When you're dealing with a nuclear power, of course you have to calculate all the possible outcomes of your behavior.
Chemical attack.
We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
Нам объявили настоящую гибридную войну, тотальную войну. Этот термин, который использовал в Германии, сейчас
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today on the channel we are going to be talking about 10 different things that have happened in the last 24 hours that all point towards World War III. These are not put in any order of importance, so some of the most important ones might be near the end, so please stick with me throughout the course of this video. Now, one of the first things that we've seen transpire is this attack on a Saudi oil refinery, which apparently is going to drastically reduce their output, possibly by up to 25%, at least temporarily. Now, this comes on the heels, of course, of their denial of working with the United States in order to increase their petroleum output in order to meet the new demand in the void which was created by the sanctions that were put on Russia. Now, apparently the United States and Saudi are now talking once again, potentially looking at trading weapons for oil. And then, of course, this missile was fired from Yemen. So was this a message being sent by someone? God only knows, but it's certainly a coincidence, isn't it? Now, Russia has also launched some sort of communication satellite. And of course, this has the letter Z on it, which has become a symbol for those who support the government's supposed demilitarization of Ukraine. Now, they're calling this a communication satellite. But just remember, guys, we are entering the age of space warfare. This could be a wide variety of things. We don't know what it is exactly. And it could even be a high-altitude EMP weapon for all we know. But we're just going to have to take them at their word at this point in time. But it does seem quite suspicious and quite timely. They're saying that this communication satellite is going to be used for naval vessels to communicate with aircraft. Regardless of whether it's a secret space weapon or not, it's definitely a sign of escalation. Now, we also know that Russia has an S-550 missile system which can shoot down actual satellites. I believe this was the one that was tested last year when they shot down the satellite. Most people don't even know this weapon exists. And when you see this weapon in action, you can see how advanced Russian missile technology is. Remember, before any large-scale nuclear engagement or an engagement with NATO, you would expect that they would be shooting down satellites, possibly even using different space weapons in order to disrupt communications or even take out the power grid of NATO countries by a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse weapon, as we talked about yesterday with Dr. Peter Vincent Prive. So go check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. But the power of the S-550 missile defense system is just unreal. It looks like something that's science fiction. And if you haven't seen it yet, go and watch videos of the S-550 in action. It is absolutely unbelievable, and we should not take this lightly. Now, another story which is very concerning is this story coming out of particularly Western media. Now, The authoritarian Russian media rejects this idea, but we have to look at it anyways, and that's that 2 of the 3 people with access to Russian nuclear codes were supposedly missing. Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov haven't responded to calls from the Pentagon, so there's a concern in the United States of a Russian nuclear attack in Ukraine having reached a newer level, with it becoming clear that the 2 of the 3 people with access to the Russian nuclear codes are in fact missing. Now, Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, remained unaccounted for, with some reports suggesting that he has been missing since March 11th. Now, apparently, he has supposedly made an appearance since that time, and there was a video released of him and some other high-ranking generals having a discussion, but it's not certain whether that's a current video or not. Some people have speculated that they've all just retreated to bunkers. That's why they've been out of the public eye. Other people have suggested that maybe there is some sort of shakedown in the Kremlin right now. It's really hard to say. But of course, this is very disconcerting for a lot of people in the US, which has caused them to perhaps look more deeply into the nuclear issue. And perhaps this is why you now have Joe Biden reportedly changing the nuclear weapons policy of the United States. Now, Joe Biden is due to announce a change in nuclear weapons policy next week. It's been claimed if the US were to change its policy on nuclear attacks, how would it affect the war in Ukraine against Russia? Obviously, the stakes in Ukraine are higher now than they've ever been at any point in the month-long war. And today, U.S. President Joe Biden agreed that the USA would be willing to use nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances, according to the Telegraph. This is a marked change from the recent U.S. policy of reducing the country's nuclear potential. So we can see that old Sleepy Joe is starting to have his finger a little bit closer to the button. Now, another important development is this notion in Western media that's being pumped that Russian forces have finished their first stage of war and that they're now shifting their focus to the east. Now, of course, Western media is claiming that this is a sign of defeat, that the Russians have now foregone the rest of Ukraine and are only going to focus on Luhansk and the Donetsk regions. But what they don't tell you is the thousands of military installations and pieces of military equipment that have effectively been destroyed and neutralized throughout the entirety of Ukraine. We haven't heard anything about this. We're talking about over 1,000 tanks, dozens of airplanes, thousands of various military buildings, and you're not seeing images of this, you're not seeing TikToks of this, because all of the Russian soldiers have had their phones taken away precisely because the Russians don't want for operational security and intelligence purposes, don't want this kind of information, and they're really playing this matter-of-factly. Now, some people are suggesting that now that they've taken Mariupol and they created that land bridge from Luhansk, Donetsk to Crimea, which is one of their main goals, that they're now going to focus on where the bulk of Ukrainian forces are, which is in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now that they've been able to drastically sever the supply line from the west, and they've gotten some measure of neutralization in the west, they're going to put a lot of their eggs in the basket of the east. But just remember one thing, okay? When the Russians, 2 days prior to their attacking Ukraine, they also said that, we're pulling back our troops, and they showed video of them retreating from the border, and everybody was like, see, nothing is going to happen. And around that time, we said that there is no de-escalation. We were one of the few voices to say that, and sure enough, 2 days later, they invaded the country. So just keep that in mind, that all of this really means a whole lot of nothing, in my opinion. Now, we also have this chemical weapons thing floating around the news that a lot of people have failed to understand why this is such a diversion. Because realistically, chemical weapons aren't that effective. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, they're effective because they're cheap and you don't have to damage buildings and this and that. But the fact of the matter is, you got to outfit all of your guys with CBRN gear, CBRN gear, which is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, so you don't kill your own guys. It really is weather dependent. In order to get it into the building, you got to get it in there somehow. So you have to launch it somehow, or you have to, throw it in a building, like in a grenade form, or whatever the case might be. So the notion that they would rely on something like this just seems kind of silly. And regardless, I mean, just the notion of only responding or only intervening if they use chemical weapons on its face is dumb, because you could kill, by that logic, thousands of people by conventional weapons, and you're saying that they're not going to get involved, even though, I mean, that's just as gruesome and brutal to have people maimed and paralyzed and losing limbs and losing vision and all of these freakish casualties that you're going to have just by use of conventional weapons. I mean, it's not even technically a weapon of mass destruction unless you were able to really deploy it on a massive scale, which of course it would backfire on you right away. So I think a lot of this saber rattling, I mean, some people are saying it's indicative of a possible false flag. Who knows? United States is making it abundantly clear that they would respond in some way, shape, or form, whatever that means, to the use of chemical weapons. How are they going to get involved? To what degree are they going to get involved? Nobody really knows. But the fact of the matter is, based on who I've spoken to, right now, NATO is outgunned in Europe, even with the help of the US. They still have drastically less troops than the Russians, and their military as well. Obviously, they're dwarfed in terms of their nuclear and tactical nuclear capabilities, as discussed with Dr. Pry yesterday. And Dr. Pry brought up something very interesting yesterday about how the Ukrainians actually have probably one of the most formidable fighting forces in Europe, barring, the French nuclear missiles and, of course, the UK's nuclear missiles. But, if you take the nuclear out of the equation, the Ukrainians were very, very well equipped. They had the most tanks, apparently. They had more tanks than all of the other countries in Europe combined, mainland Europe, that is. So that's definitely something to think about, that a lot of people, and myself included, had this perception that if they're struggling with Ukraine, then they're definitely not going to be able to take NATO. But the reasons provided by Dr. Pry that they were struggling with Ukraine is that, one, Ukraine is using Russian equipment. Ukraine knows the Russians well because they were all trained the same way under the Soviet Union. So they know their tactics, they know their strategy, whereas we would not be privy to that sort of strategy. Now, we also have some very, very intense brinkmanship and saber rattling taking place, not necessarily on the battlefield, but in terms of Russian media. So we have Lavrov today saying that he believes that total war has been declared on the country as a result of sanctions, and essentially saying NATO has declared war on Russia. So in their mind, they're getting really close to officially recognizing NATO as an enemy. So this indicates that they're just a few steps away, possibly from basically declaring war on all of NATO. Because when you think about it, if NATO is supplying Ukraine weapons, NATO is imposing these sanctions on the country, they are going to just declare war. We have a lot of really strong rhetoric from Russia's deputy ambassador to the UN about threatening to use nuclear weapons. We have some really intense talk on Russian TV, basically threatening Warsaw with nukes. A bunch of pundits sitting around having a conversation on mainstream Russian television, talking about if Poland was to greenlight a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, that it would be met with a nuclear response. So that's pretty darn significant. We have this really cartoonish story coming out of North Korea, where they're testing that big missile that they paraded a couple years ago. I believe it was in late 2020 when they showed the world's largest transportable nuclear ICBM. And they tested this today. They shot it, I believe, somewhere around Japan. It had a flight time of about 54 minutes. Now, this is pretty telling because this shows just how far North Korea has come, and it indicates that they're very close, if not there already, with the ability to launch a nuclear strike. And remember, if North Korea launches a nuke, and if we are in its crosshairs, chances are it's not going to waste it on just a nuke. It is going to be an electromagnetic pulse weapon. Now, obviously, this would probably result in their demise, so this is going to be a last-ditch effort, but we do see here that North Korea is on its path to become a formidable nuclear power. As goofy and as comical as the whole thing seems, it's just a fact we have to live with. So we have all of the playing pieces. Everything is intensifying. Things are not ratcheting down one bit. We're going to have a video on the coming food shortages that have now been admitted by the U.S. administration, and we're going to talk about all the factors that are going to contribute to that and how you can prepare for it in an upcoming video this week. Stay tuned. We also have a lieutenant colonel of the Air Force, a retired lieutenant colonel who's now running for governor of a U.S. state. They work closely with the nuclear weapons program in the United States, and they're going to come on and talk all about U.S. nuclear capabilities, dispel any myths, misconceptions, and set the record straight about what the U.S. military capabilities are in that respect. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.